Outside the massive stone walls of Rome, an army of starving Wellington stands in the mud. Inside the citizens are also starving. The greatest empire the world has ever seen is completely paralyzed. For 800 years, no foreign enemies had burned these gates. The Romans believed the city was eternal. They believed they were the absolute center of the universe. Someone inside the city, desperate and hungry, quietly walks up to the heavy Salarian gate. They pull the iron bar back. The gates groan open, and just like that, the ancient world completely fractures. Today, we are not just going to memorize days or look at the marble statues. We are going to walk through the heavy mud of the Roman legions. We are going to smell the blood of the Colosseum and stand in the dark halls of the Senate, where dictators were stabbed to death. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let me tell you the true unfiltered story of how a small swampy village conquered the entire known world, and why it ultimately collapsed under its own massive weight. Why does a civilization that built roads we still use today end up feeding its own citizens to starving dogs? Let's find out. In the meantime, give this video a like and subscribe. Get comfortable, and let's continue our story. Go back to 753 BC. Rome was not a city of marble. It was a miserable, muddy swamp next to the Tiber River. The legend says it was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, who were raised by a wolf. They argued over where to build the city. Romulus solved the argument by killing his brother. That is how Rome started, with fratricide and blood in the dirt. For the first 2.5 centuries, Rome was ruled by kings. Most of them were Etruscans, a powerful neighboring tribe. But the Romans deeply hated the idea of king. They hated being ruled by one man. In 509 BC, the last king, Tarquin the Proud, went too far. His son assaulted a noble Roman woman named Lucretia. The Roman people snapped. They violently kicked the king out, locked the heavy wooden gates of the city, and made a solemn vow. Rome would never ever have a king again. They created a new system, the Republic. Instead of one king, they elected two men every year called consuls. They had a senate made of all the wealthy men to give advice. The system was mathematically designed to prevent anyone from getting too much power. It was brilliant, it was stubborn, and it was deeply superstitious. In fact, the Romans were so superstitious that they wouldn't even fight a battle without asking chickens for permission. Yeah, chickens. During the First Punic War, a Roman admiral named Publius Claudius Pulcher was about to launch a massive naval attack. But the sacred chickens on his ship refused to eat their grain. According to Roman religion, this was a terrible omen. The gods were saying, "Do not attack." But the admiral was arrogant. He grabbed the heavy brass cage, walked to the edge of the ship, and threw the sacred chickens straight into the dark ocean. He yelled, "If they want it, let them drink." He launched the attack anyway, and his fleet was completely annihilated. Tens of thousands of Roman drones. The Republic put him on a trial for treason. Not for losing the ships, but for drowning the chickens. Think about it. A military superpower ruled by poultry. What modern superstitions do you think would completely ruin a country today? Let me know your theory down in the comments. By 264 BC, Rome had conquered the Italian peninsula. They had a massive, highly disciplined army. They fought in heavy formations called the manipole. They used large, curved wooden shields called scutums, covered in thick leather. When a Roman legion locked its shields together, it became a moving brick wall. But as Rome looked across the Mediterranean Sea, they saw a monster staring back, Carthage. Carthage was located in modern-day Tunis. There was insanely rich. They controlled the sea with massive wooden warships. Rome and Carthage were likely two heavyweights locked in a small room. A fight to the death was completely unavoidable. They fought three massive wars called Punic Wars. The first war was fought over the islands of Sicily. Rome had no navy. They literally found a wrecked Catanian ships on a beach, reserve engineered it, and built a fleet of 100 heavy wooden ships in just 2 months. They added a brutal invention, the corvus, a heavy wooden bridge with a massive iron spikes at the end. They would sail close to Carthaginian ships, drop the heavy bricks so the spikes smashed into the enemy deck, and turned a naval battle into a brutal infantry brawl. Rome won, but Carthage wanted revenge. Enter Hannibal Barca. In 218 BC, Hannibal did the impossible. He marched a massive army, including dozens of heavy war elephants, straight over the freezing, jagged peaks of the Alps and directly into the Italy. Hannibal was a military genius. He spent 15 years walking up and down Italy, absolutely slaughtering every Roman army sent against him. The worst day in Roman history happened at the Battle of Cannae. Hannibal tricked the massive Roman army into a trap. He surrounded them in a single afternoon. 50,000 Roman soldiers were hacked to death into the dirt. The blood turned the dry dust into a thick, red swamp. Any normal country would have surrendered, but Rome wasn't normal. They simply refused to negotiate. They drafted teenage boys. They freed slaves and handed them heavy iron spears. They just keep coming. Finally, a Roman general named Scipio Africanus took the fight directly to Africa. He defeated Hannibal. Rome survived. 50 years later, in 146 BC, Rome returned to Carthage one last time. They didn't just defeat the city, they systematically dismantled it. They burned the heavy wooden buildings to the ground. They sold 50,000 men, women, and children into brutal slavery. The story says that salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. That path is a myth. Salt was too expensive. But the message was clear. Carthage was entirely erased from the map. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, but all that new wealth was about to become a poison. The Roman Republic was designed to govern a small city-state. It was completely unacquired to run a global empire. As gold, silver, and millions of enslaved people flooded into Italy, the rich senators bought up all the land. They created massive mega farms called latifundia. They used free slave labor. The regular Roman citizen, the men who had actually fought the war, lost their small farms. They were forced to wander the filthy, crowded streets of Rome, unemployed and starving. The inequality became crushing. Two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, tried to fix it. They proposed laws to take land from the ultra-rich and give it back to the poor veterans. The Senate reaction was pure violence. A mob of wealthy senators grabbed heavy wooden chair legs from the Senate floor, chased Tiberius out in the street, and beat him to death. A few years later, his brother Gaius met similar violent end. The Republic had crossed a dark line. Politics was no longer about voting. It was about violence. Then came a general named Gaius Marius. He changed the Roman army forever. Before Marius, you had to own property to join the army. Marius opened the army to the poorest, most desperate men in Rome. The state gave them heavy armor and weapons. The generals promised them land and gold when they retired. This was a fatal shift. Suddenly, the heavy armored legions were no longer loyal to the Republic. They were loyal only to their generals. Generals started using their armies like personal hit squads. A restless commander named Sulla actually marched his heavy infantry directly into the city of Rome, something that was strictly illegal and highly taboo. He posted lists of his political enemies in the forum. If your name was on the list, anyone could legally kill you and take your property. Thousands died. The Republic was rotten from the inside out. There were a massive slave rebellion, the most famous led by a gladiator named Spartacus, who held off the Roman legions for years before his army was crushed. 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way. For miles, heavy wooden crosses lined in the dirt road, rotting in the sun. The Senate was corrupt. The streets were run by violent gangs. The stage was perfectly set for a dictator. Gaius Julius Caesar was brilliant, deeply in debt, and insanely ambitious. He needed military glory and massive amount of gold to buy political power in Rome, so he took his legions into Gaul, which is modern-day France. For 8 years, Caesar waged a brutal campaign. He built heavy wooden bridges across massive rivers in a matter of days. He besieged heavy stone fortresses. The climax came at the city of Alesia. A massive Gallic army retreated onto a high hill. Caesar didn't attack. He ordered his men to build a massive wall of heavy timber and deeply trenches entirely around the hill to starve them out. Then, a massive Gallic relief army arrived behind Caesar, so Caesar ordered his men to build a second heavy wooden wall facing outward. He trapped himself inside a wooden donut of his own making, and he won. The Gallic leaders surrendered. 1,000,000 Gauls were dead. Another 1,000,000 were sold into slavery in heavy iron chains. Caesar was now the richest and most popular man in Rome. The Senate was terrified of him. They ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew if he did that, his enemies would kill him. In 48 BC, he stood at the edge of a small muddy river called the Rubicon. It was the legal border of Italy. Bringing an army across it was treason. Caesar paused, and then he said, "The die is cast." He walked his heavy infantry through the water. A brutal civil war followed. Caesar won easily. He made himself dictator for life. He forgave his enemies and tried to fix the broken economy. But a group of senators, including his friend Brutus, believed Caesar was trying to make himself a king. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, Caesar walked into a Senate meeting. The senators surrounded him. They pulled heavy iron daggers from their robes. They stabbed him 23 times. Caesar pulled his toga over his face and bled to death on the cold marble floor. The assassins thought they had saved the Republic, but they just started another civil war. Caesar had secretly adopted his great-nephew, a frail, sick teenager named Octavian. Octavian was an absolute political genius with ice in his veins. He teamed up with Caesar's top generals, Mark Antony, and they ruthlessly hunted down the assassins. Then, inevitably, Octavian and Antony turned on each other. Antony allied with Cleopatra, the incredibly wealthy queen of Egypt. It all ended at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's heavy warships completely destroyed Antony's fleet. Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide in Egypt. Octavian was the last man standing. He was completely alone at the top of the world. He was smart. He didn't call himself dictator. He didn't call himself king. He kept the Senate. He kept the consuls. He kept all the old, heavy traditions of the Republic. But he held all the actual power. He took a new name, Augustus. The Roman Republic was officially a dead corpse. But Augustus dressed it up, painted its face, and pretended it was still alive. The Roman Empire was born. Augustus brought peace. For the next 200 years, the Mediterranean world experienced the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. The city of Rome swelled to over 1 million people. It was a massive concrete jungle. It smelled heavily of wood smoke, raw sewage, and baking bread. The rich lived in beautiful villages with hot running water. The poor lived in a massive, poorly built wooden apartment blocks called insulae, which constantly collapsed or caught fire. To keep the unemployed mob from rioting, the emperors provided bread and circuses, free grain, and incredibly violent entertainment. The Colosseum was a massive heavy stone machine designed for this. Tens of thousands of people packed onto concrete benches. The heat was suffocating. The smell of exotic animals' dung and spilled human blood hung thick in static air. Gladiators wearing heavy iron helmets and carrying thick bronze shields hacked each other to pieces. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a political tool. It showed the absolute, crushing power of the emperor over life and death, and the emperors themselves were often completely insane. There was Caligula, a cruel sadist who demanded to be worshipped as a living god and allegedly tried to make his horse a consul. He was murdered by his own heavy armored bodyguards in a dark corridor. There was Nero, who killed his own mother. When a massive fire burned down half of Rome, Nero used the empty, scorched land to build himself a colossal golden palace. To deflect the blame, he ordered the first major persecution of small, strange new religion cult called Christians. They were covered in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, tied to heavy wooden poles, and burned alive to light his garden parties. But despite the madmen at the top, the massive bureaucratic machine of the empire kept running. In the 2nd century AD, Rome was ruled by the 5 gods emperors. Men like Trajan, who marched his heavy legions all the way to the Persian Gulf, expanding the empire to its absolute maximum physical size. And Hadrian, who realized the empire was too big to defend, he ordered a massive heavy stone wall to be built straight across the width of Britain, simply to lock the wild tribes out. The empire was a fortress. It had an incredibly complex economy. You could travel from Syria to Spain on heavy paved stone roads, using the same silver coins, speaking the same language, and protected by the exact same law. It seems like it would last forever, but the foundation was deeply cracked. The year 235, the emperor was murdered by his own troops in a muddy tent in Germany. For the next 50 years, the Roman Empire completely lost its mind. This was the crisis of the 3rd century. Dozens of the generals declared themselves emperor. They pulled the heavy legions away from the border to fight each other in endless, grinding civil war. Because the borders were undefended, massive confederation of barbarian tribes crosses the frozen rivers into Roman territory. They burned cities and stole the heavy gold reserves. To pay for those endless wars, the government started printing bad money. They took the solid silver coins and mixed them with cheap copper. The currency became completely worthless. Hyperinflation destroyed the economy. Trade stopped. People went back to bartering with heavy sack of grain. Then a massive plague swept through the crowded cities. And in its peak, 5,000 people were dying every single day in the city of Rome alone. The bodies piled up in the dirt. The empire actually shattered into 3 completely separate pieces. It was inches away from total collapse. Then came a tough, brutal soldier named Aurelian. In just 5 years, he marched his heavy infantry in every direction. He physically smashed the breakaway provinces back into the empire. He built massive, heavy brick walls entirely around the city of Rome, because for the first time in centuries, the capital itself was in danger. Aurelian saved the empire, but it was a man named Diocletian who completely rewired it. Diocletian realized that one man could not manage this massive heavy beast. The borders were too long, the administration was too slow, so he split the Roman Empire in half. He created a system with 4 co-emperors. He massively expanded the heavy bureaucracy. He turned citizens into subjects. And then, Diocletian did something no Roman emperor had ever done. He simply retired. He moved to a massive stone palace by the sea and spent his last years farming cabbage in the dirt. Diocletian's system of 4 emperors immediately collapsed into a massive civil war. In 212, the general named Constantine was marching on Rome. The night before a massive battle at the Millwall Bridge, Constantine looked up at the sky. He claimed he saw a vision of a cross and heard a voice say, "In this sign, conquer." Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their heavy wooden shields. The next day, he completely crushed his rival. The enemy emperor drowned in heavy mud of the Tiber River. Constantine's victory changed human history forever. He legalized Christianity. The small, persecuted cult suddenly became the religion of the emperor. Within a few generations, the old pagan temples would be empty. Their heavy stone doors locked forever. Constantine also realized that the city of Rome was completely useless. It was too far from the wealthy trade routes of the east, and too far from the dangerous military borders of the Danube. So, he packed up the government and moved east. He found an ancient Greek city on a narrow, easily defensible strait of water. He poured massive amount of gold and heavy stone to rebuild it. He called it Nova Rome, New Rome, but everyone else called it the city of Constantine, Constantinople. The center of gravity had permanently shifted. The west rural, poor, and difficult to defend. The east was urban, incredibly wealthy, and heavily fortified. The Roman Empire was technically still one state, but the two halves were slowly drifting apart in the dark. By the late 4th centuries, a terrifying new force emerged from the west, freezing stepped through the Central Asia. The Huns. The Huns were highly mobile, incredibly violent cavalry warriors. They swept westward, utterly destroying everything in their path. They pushed massive tribes of Germanic people, like the Goths, completely out of their homelands. In 376 AD, tens of thousands of starving Gothic refugees stood on the north bank of the heavy white Danube River. They begged the Romans to let them cross into the safety of the empire. The Romans agreed. But the local Roman governor were deeply corrupt. A commander named Lupicius stole the food meant for the refugees. The Goths were literally starving in the dirt. Lupicius offered them a deal. He would give them heavy chunks of dog meat to eat, but in exchange, the Goths has to sell their own children into brutal slavery. The Goths were pushed beyond human endurance. They snapped. They grabbed heavy iron weapons and rebelled. In 387 AD, the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens marched his army infantry to crush them at the Battle of Adrianople. It was a total, unmitigated catastrophe. The Gothic cavalry completely smashed the Roman lines. Two-thirds of the Roman army was slaughtered in the dust. Emperor Valens was burned alive inside a heavy wooden farmhouse. The myth of Roman invincibility was permanently broken. The empire was formally split into two total separate states in 395. The east was safe behind the massive, impenetrable stone walls of Constantinople, but the west was bleeding to death. The borders completely collapsed, the Rhine River frozen solid, and massive confederations of barbarians simply walked across the ice into Gaul. The Roman legions in west simply ceased to exist because there was no gold left to pay them. Which brings us back where we started, 410 AD. Alaric the Goth walks through the heavy wooden gates of Rome. For 3 days, the barbarians looted the ancient city. They stripped the heavy gold from the temples. They smashed the marble statues. The physical damage wasn't total, but the psychological shock was unimaginable. Rome had been violated. The Western Empire spent the next 60 years slowly disintegrating. The heavy bureaucracy evaporated. The stone roads fell into disrepair. The massive aqueducts stopped flowing, and the great public baths sat dry and empty. Finally, in 476, a barbarian general named Odoacer walked into the imperial palace in Italy. Sitting on the heavy throne was a 16-year-old boy, the very last Western Roman emperor. His name, ironically, was Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer wasn't even bothered killing him. He just told the boy to take off the heavy purple cloak and send him away to live on a farm. Odoacer packed up the heavy imperial insignia and shipped it east to Constantinople. He sent a letter saying the West was no longer needed an emperor. The Roman Empire in the West didn't explode in a massive cinematic battle. It just quietly expired in the dark. But here is the most fascinating part of the story. Rome didn't actually die. The western half collapsed in the dark age of feudalism and isolated kingdoms. But the eastern half, centered in Constantinople, survived for another 1,000 years. They continued to call themselves Romans. They read Roman books and followed Roman laws until the massive stone walls finally fell to cannons in 1453. And even in the West, the ghost of Rome never left. Look around you. The calendars you use to track your days is a slightly modified version of the one of Julius Caesar invented. The alphabet you are reading in the comments and the letter I am just using to speak to you were carved into heavy stone columns by Roman engineers. The entire concept of modern law, the heavy architecture of our government buildings, and the very idea of a republic, it all comes from that swampy little village on the Tiber River. Rome is the foundation bedrock of Western civilizations. It teaches a cold, heavy lesson. No matter how powerful a nation becomes, no matter how much heavy stone they build, or how invincible their army seems, nothing lasts forever. Gravity always wins. But history never truly ends. Now, that you watched the Western Empire slowly bleed out in the mud, you need to see exactly how the Eastern half survived for another millennium against impossible odds. Click the video on your screen right now to step inside the new historical videos, and I will see you there.